Hello, BookTube. I'm doing a read-along this month of this book right here. The historian Dan Jones's fiction debut, Essex Dogs, first book in a trilogy, about a group of mercenary warriors from England who join King Edward III's expedition to conquer France uh, as the kickoff to the Hundred Years' War. King Edward III goes over with his famous son, the Black Prince, and a whole bunch of warriors in order to burn and rape and pillage from one French village to another in an attempt to take the country, which Edward believes is his own patrimony. Uh, the Essex Dogs aren't, as the easy movie poster tagline goes, they aren't fighting for king, they aren't fighting for country, they're fighting for each other. That's not 100% clear. It's a great, dude lit tagline, but I don't think most of the Essex Dogs that we've met in this book would be fighting for each other if they were fighting for free. I think they would switch sides or stop fighting altogether. But we meet our characters, and they conform very closely to the guidelines of this kind of Band of Brothers action hero adventure story. The No two of that central core of characters will be the same, except for the small group of that central core of characters who will be not only similar but identical. And the reason they aren't differentiated in terms of character stereotypes is because they're all doomed. They're all going to die. But the ones that are differentiated, the somber, stolid guy who doesn't say much but is extra deadly in combat, the mentally unstable character who's right on the edge of psychopathy, the everyman omnicompetent main character hero, the Bruce Willis type figure who's uh, better at everything than everybody else, but also a generalist and the guiding voice of common sense. And also there'll be other characters, maybe a cod philosopher, maybe an intellect turned savage warrior, maybe in this case, a neophyte who may or may not be holding a secret, maybe two secrets. And the story unfolded in the second part. We're now finishing up the book, and then next week, Micah and I will talk about the book. So next week will be a spoilery type thing, I would imagine. Maybe not. Maybe we can do the conversation just in generalities. That would be my own preference would be that we don't make any videos that are going to ruin someone's day down the line. Uh, Spoilers have been an active consideration in this read along so far because in our boyish 20-something enthusiasm, we picked a book for February read along that wasn't out in the U.S. until Valentine's Day, so we had to be careful of what specifics we were saying anyway. I don't know exactly how that live stream will happen, but because Mike is kind of temperamental, as you all know, he's hell to deal with. It's the old Hollywood saying, "Never co-star with children or animals." but we'll work out something. We'll figure out some sort of discussion. So we're finishing up the sort of overview of the book today. But the clear indication of what the rest of the book was going to be was obvious in last week's installment. There's only so much that this can be. The Essex Dogs are not known to history. A couple of their landed gentry or entitled superiors, all the way up the chain to the Black Prince and the King. But before that, long before that, a couple of the lords insigniors who give them their pay, who are their immediate superiors, a couple of those figures are known to history. They are actual historical characters. A couple of the characters who become important in the French Resistance are known to history. A blind king, for instance, but others as well. But the Essex Dogs are unknown to history. So, unless you're writing some sort of Flashman style parody, history can't turn on what they do. We know what history turns on here. Battles can have many little turning points, so the Essex Dogs can be important, but it's important for Dan Jones to do two things. It's predictable for him to do two things. One is that he will develop some sort of MacGuffin subplot involving specifically the Essex Dogs, and he does that. He does that a couple of different ways in the second part of the book that we read. One involving A secret that two of the Essex dogs share that comes out of left field and feels very 21st century, and the other involving the retrieval of 3 severed heads. A mission that is doomed to fail, or seems it. And the the higher profile the Essex dogs get in the commission of that mission, and also in the threat of that secret being revealed, the more they become known to their ill-tempered superiors who don't really want to be wasting time talking with grunts or dealing with them in any way. There has to be that element of a MacGuffin. And there also has to be a more of the same element. There might be a MacGuffin, there might be a plot that involves the Essex dogs and propels that element of the story forward. But it also has to be that they're just going from village to village doing their Essex dogs thing and saying their Essex dog thing. And they do. That does happen. That finishes out the book. The stakes get higher and higher. A major battle is coming in this third part, and we know that. So the tension is a lot greater. But a lot of those narrative things that Dan Jones was doing in the second part of the book especially, he just keeps doing in this third part. I mentioned a few of them last week, one of them being the serial villainization of the Black Prince, who is here. The Black Prince is here made into the most effete fop imaginable. The historical record does not bear that out, but it's effectively done. I think it's a little bit predictable that the higher up in the chain you go, the more deplorable the leadership gets. That also is a very 21st century idea, but it's effectively done. And also the Essex dog's reactions, right? Especially our main Essex dog, the leader of the group, is going to be cynicism embodied. He has to be. For a 21st century that has known no peace at all. The 21st century has perpetually been at war. Naturally, there's going to be cynicism here completely. I mentioned last time that sometimes that cynicism becomes anachronistic. Sometimes it's taken so far that although it's completely comfortable for a 2023 audience, it wouldn't work at all. For a 1356 audience, the characters wouldn't act this way at all. You just have to accept that. Like I mentioned last time, that is a narrative choice. That's a storytelling choice that any writer of historical fiction has to make. You can't do both. You have to do one or the other. Either your characters are immediately recognizable and therefore anachronistic, or they're completely faithful to the original and off-puttingly alien to a modern audience. Historians have been making that decision forever. I'm not faulting Dan Jones for whichever side of that he comes down on, but there are ways to do it, and there are ways to do it. I think a lot of the ways that he does it in this book are a little ham-handed. They're a little obvious. Keep in mind, this is the first time that he has done this. He's written histories, but not fiction. It's entirely possible that the next book in the Essex Dog series will be significantly better than this one, along exactly those lines. This is an author whose nonfiction works definitely get better the further they go along. In other words, he learns from his mistakes. He notices them and he learns from them. So who knows what the second book will be? Maybe Micah and I will read it. Maybe we will do a read-along. Maybe we will foist a read-along on you 2 weeks before the book comes out in America. Maybe we won't learn from our mistakes. But that continues in this book. The Essex dogs are going to encounter mind-numbing, unbelievable violence. This is an incredibly gory, violent book. They're going to encounter that. It's going to shock the lily-livered, highfalutin nobles who only dabble in this sort of thing and who think, as one of them says famously at the beginning of the book, one of them says that it'll be a good lark. And we're supposed to think about that exactly what we do. No character at the time would have said that, and if a character at the time did say that, the characters who would have been the real-life Essex dogs would have said, "Yes, sir. May I have another, sir?" There wouldn't have been any kind of, predator, aliens, band of brothers type grousing or cynicism about what you don't know and what you haven't seen. That happens in this section too, where we get one encounter after another where the Essex dogs are so over the top, seen it all, done it all, that for me it wore a little, especially the second time through the book when I wasn't. There's a headlong readability to this book. A number of you have commented on that you just couldn't stop reading. I view that, of course, since I'm not a snob, I view that as an unbelievable mark of success. Regardless of how some of the stereotype the stereotypes and the gimmicks annoyed me. That's hard to do. Just in writing fiction, that is hard to do. And Dan Jones unquestionably achieves that. You don't want to stop reading this. Even if, in my case, you're a little bit fed up with how predictable some of it is. And in this third part, Dan Jones has to do two things in order to finish up the book. I mentioned that there's a secret. There's a secret that has made its way into the Essex dogs and compromised a couple of their members. And one of those members has secrets of his own, deeper secrets that are only exacerbated by the secret that we're learning about, if that makes any sense at all. In the course of the conclusion of this novel, those two things have to be resolved. You can make room for new ones in the next book, in the next chapter in the series, but you have to resolve those in this book. That's one of the things you have to do to finish out the book if you're Dan Jones and you know what you're doing, and it's clear that he does. And the other thing that you have to do is provide a massive action set piece. This is an action novel. So the last thing you can do in a book set in the opening years of the 100 Years' War is end with our characters marching on the road because the 100 Years' War has 100 more years to go. That's the last thing in the world you can do. There has to be a big set piece payoff, and there is. There's a huge set piece payoff at the end of this book. Big battle. All of our heroes are involved in one way or another. Secrets come out as a result of that battle. Characters, the relationship between some Essex dog characters change. And there is also, because Dan Jones is fairly young, and I am sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, learned all of his storytelling ability from plastic media. I'd be willing to bet he didn't learn any of it firsthand from books. I don't think this is a character who grew up on Bernard Cornwell or anything else. I think this author grew up on video games and TV and movies. And I think that's obvious. Because in addition to the giant set piece battle that ends the book, there has to be, when someone like this writes a book, a set piece of action. In addition to the battle, there has to be a set piece of action, a memorable moment designed to be caught on film, designed for that, where it's unrealistic, it doesn't make any sense at all, it defies the laws of physics, but it makes for great movie making. Not necessarily anything great on the page, but great movie making. I believe that Dan Jones has probably seen a million such moments as that, and read almost none of them. So this is a debut novelist who I'd be willing to bet has played the scene at the end of Die Hard when Alan Rickman falls off the building in slow motion. Those of you who've seen Die Hard, I'm sure that my co-host Micah has not. Micah does not know any cultural references at all that land anywhere later than the court of the Romanovs. So I'm sure that he has not seen Die Hard, much less know it. So he doesn't know the scene I'm talking about, but a lot of you will. It's in many ways the signature piece, the signature moment in the movie Die Hard does not involve Bruce Willis. In many ways, the signature moment is Alan Rickman's final scene. And it's ridiculous, right? I'm a Die Hard fan myself. Of course I am. You Die Hard fans out there, come on. You can't have had so much of the Kool-Aid that you won't admit that. That scene is ridiculous. It's great. Absolutely great. But it is ridiculous. And I think Dan Jones learned all that he knows at heart about drama and storytelling from movies like that and scenes like that. So he had to have a scene like that at the end of this book. And he does. It involves our main Essex dog and a horse. If you've got to the end of the book, you know the moment I'm talking about. All I can say is please don't try it yourself. Physics doesn't work that way. It won't work for you in the way that you want. It won't work the way it does on the page. But to wrap up this book, it does work on the page. So this is my second time through this book, and my judgment on it is shaded a little bit. The second time through, I noticed some of the laziness in it that I kind of wish weren't there, even though I was at the same time noticing how incredibly energetic it is. As a debut novel, this is not taking anything for granted. It's just, I think the laziness comes from a lot of the action and narrative assumptions that Dan Jones has not bothered to examine. which is, again, a debut novelist thing. Debut novelists tend not to do that. That whether they're writing action or science fiction or upper middle class Connecticut divorce, they tend not to examine rigorously their own storytelling presuppositions. It's writing books that will do that. It's getting fan feedback and reading reviews, which they all do. If they say they don't, they're lying. It's that tends to refine those sorts of things in an author who is willing to learn and get better at his craft. I think this author is. So, even though I noticed those lazinesses more, my final verdict here is that this was an amazing success. This is an amazingly successful book. In more than any other way, the main way that I mentioned, which is that you don't want to stop reading. You want to just keep turning the pages. That is a skill. That should not be taken for granted. That most writers can't do that. And this writer can, and it's not the same as in his histories. Dan Jones's histories, it is very much possible to stop reading. They're not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but they don't read like this. And that takes skill. That means that didn't port over from the genre that he usually works in. He had to have that skill or develop it on his own. So kudos to him. And the ending of the book is slam bang. I'll give it that. So there wasn't much in it that I didn't see coming, but it was still a slam bang ending. So my verdict is still largely positive. And maybe the best compliment of all that I can give the book is that even a second time through, I'm eager to read the next book in the series. Very much so. If his next book is a work of history, I'll be disappointed. I want the next book. I want the next adventure of the Essex dogs. I wouldn't, in fact, be at all disappointed if he gave up writing history. This is always touchy. I didn't try to mention this last time because it's always touchy. And the last thing I want is to be called an elitist again on BookTube or ever in my life in the history of the universe until the heat death of the galaxy. That's the last thing in the world I want. But nevertheless, there are histories and there are histories. And Dan Jones's histories are good. They're serviceable. They hit all the obvious notes. I don't think we'd be losing anything majorly important if we lost him as a historian. I guess what I'm trying to say is Essex Dogs is far better as a work of hand it to your teenage boy and he will read it in one sitting fiction than Dan Jones's histories have been as histories. This is more successful, and so I would love it if he kept doing it. I would love it if Essex Dogs gets optioned into a series or a movie, as it certainly will if it hasn't already, and gives Dan Jones yet another big pile of money shoved across the table. Maybe he'll come to that decision on his own. I'll be eager to see what happens either way. So that is Essex Dogs. That is my little impromptu read along with Micah Cummins, and we have decided, or rather, I have decided, and then worn Micah down with hundreds and hundreds of Voxer messages to continue doing buddy reads on BookTube. Why not? Why not? So, and we've already picked a book. I haven't conferred with Micah yet about when we'll make our announcement video, but I think you're going to like it. I think you're going to like the next book we do. But that is it for the read along of Essex Dogs. Those of you who've been reading it have been emailing me and saying you're really enjoying it. I haven't had a negative vote yet for the book. That certainly seems true for every other reaction forum that I've seen, whether it's Reddit or Goodreads or Amazon. That people love this thing. They really enjoy it. They get what it is. They know that it's not Tolstoy, and they really love it for what it is. That's fantastic. You can ask no more of that from a book, not fairly, unless you actually are an elitist. So next up will be discussion. I don't know what form that will take, but Micah and I will put our heads together and give it a try. And sometime soon, I mean, this is Sunday when I'm making this video, so someday soon, Monday or Tuesday, we should make an announcement video for our next read along, just to prepare you psychically and spiritually, because it's a big one. But we'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.